This is now lecture 2 in elementary Greek with Foundation Baptist College. I'm Joel Arnold, and this is a course that we're wanting to provide for the benefit of people who want to study God's Word more clearly. This lecture, we're going to be talking and introducing the concept of the Greek noun system, which is a really important concept and maybe one of the things that people struggle to get their heads wrapped around initially. Once you can get this worked out or understand and appreciate what's going on, it'll make a big difference in your ability to work with and set the foundation for your studies. And here's the core difference. The question basically goes, what ways that can a noun be configured in a language? Okay, now I'm just going to start with the assumption that maybe you're starting at a starting point. Maybe you're not clear about nouns and what that is or how that works. So let's just begin there. Within a language, you're going to have two principal types of words, nouns and verbs. Okay, so I'm going to give myself an example sentence. Joel gave the money to his friend. Okay, now I give that as an example sentence to distinguish out that if I'm looking across it, I have a whole set of different words here that are nouns. You may already have seen it if you're recognizing some of the grammar. This is a pronoun, but it's performing a noun type function. And I've got another type of word here that is a verb. Okay, and the distinction just between these is that verbs will be an action, or they will act. There will be movement. There will be a thing that happened. The nouns, if you want to think of them for present terms, they are a thing. They are the pieces that are moved around. Pause here for a theme, something that we talked about when we discussed the alphabet. And that is the theme that languages are a whole lot less distinct than we might be tempted to think of them. If you study languages, you're going to discover that there is this basic framework, nouns and verbs, and actually structured in what we'll talk about in the future, subject, verb, object. Okay, so something doing something to something, and that structure is universal across languages. Some kind of verb, some kind of actor, and some kind of action. If I'm looking back at it in this sentence, this example sentence, this we would talk about as the subject. This is the actor. That is the one doing the action of the verb. Joel is the actor, Joel gave. And then when we talk about an object, this would be the thing that he gave in this case. So the actor does the action of the verb to something. The actor, the subject, the action, the verb, the direct object, this is the way that we'll refer to this, a direct object is the thing that they acted upon. Okay, so another favorite example of mine, Joel ate cheese. Maybe a simpler structure here. If I'm looking down it, here's my verb, ate. What did he do? Okay, and a good starting point is look at the sentence and figure out where the verb is. Establish the verb. Okay, what did he do? He ate. Who did it? Well, that's the subject. And then if you're asking, okay, who did what to what? You're probably looking at the direct object, or the best test to identify direct object. If you start out, if you follow my advice, if you find the verb first, ate is my verb. Your next question is who did the thing? That'll help you identify the subject. Now that I have a subject and a verb, Joel ate. What you do to find the direct object, Joel ate, and then you need to ask this key question, what? Joel ate what? And the answer is the cheese. Or going back to this example, Joel gave. Okay, start by identifying your verb. Gave is your verb. Joel is the actor. Joel gave what? The money. Okay, subject, verb, then asked what. And that'll lead you to your direct object. Okay, now one of the points I just like to make here for setting up our discussion, and all of the things I'm mentioning here are setting up for it in different ways. One of the things I'd like to acknowledge or notice here is that I have 1, 2, 3, and pronouns are doing a nominal type thing, arguably 4. I have 3 or 4 nominals or nouns in this sentence, and I have just a single verb. We recognize sentences can get complicated, and so you can say, Joel bought, carried away, and eventually ate the cheese. And I can multiply verbs if I want. But we're recognizing that in like your boiled down simple sentence, you often have multiple nouns. And I've already recognized the different functions of these nouns, or at least some of them. I've recognized a subject here. I've recognized a direct object here. There's one more, and this is called the indirect object. And the indirect object would be the one that I gave it to. So really, this would be the order. If you want to do a flow chart, your order in analyzing, find your verb. What's the action in the sentence? Find the actor of that verb, who's doing it. Now, subject, verb, and ask what. Okay, that'll lead you to your direct object. So now I have subject, verb, direct object. And then to or for whom, and you'll get to your indirect object. Okay, when I get done with that, I have a lot of bits floating around in this sentence. And let's just recognize that something like, if I go back to this sentence, Joel ate cheese, the sentence Joel ate cheese is rather a different meaning from the cheese ate Joel. If I moved things around and I make the cheese the subject and Joel the object, I now have a grisly scene. Joel ate cheese, on the other hand, sounds delightful. Joel gave the money to his friend is rather a different meaning from the money gave his friend to Joel. And that is to say that I could have all the same words floating about in a sentence, but if you'll give them different functions, if you'll make one of those a subject, one of those a direct object, and switch them around, you'll have an entirely different meaning. And languages then have to have a solution for designating which noun does what. In other words, just imagine a sentence. If you want to imagine like a hypothetical sentence, and the sentence goes, I know that I'm going to have gave as a verb. And then other than that, I have just these nouns floating around. I have Joel, I have friend, I have money. And that's it. Like here, they're just floating about and they're linked in some way to gave, but you don't know how and what and why. Well, I mean, it's no longer language, or it's not going to be meaningful language. There's nothing I can do with it. English has a particular solution to that problem. English is an order-based language, and that is to say that if I put words in slots, that'll tell you what's doing what. Okay, so the way English solves this problem is I've got my verb, and I have a slot right here, and that slot is the subject slot. And I'll follow that by, roughly speaking, a direct object spot. And generally, my indirect object will be indicated by to or for, sometimes another preposition. But it'll be connected to a preposition, and that'll be my indirect object spot. And at that point, put what you want into those slots, and that's what they'll mean. So, for instance, when I say Joel ate the cheese, what I'm doing is I'm slotting things in. I'm putting Joel into this first slot. Well, then that means that Joel is the subject. I guess I use a different example here, so we'll do gave. Joel gave money. Whatever I put in that slot will now be the direct object. That's the direct object slot. That's why it sounded funny when I switched the order. If I say the money gave Joel, you hear it as the actor is the money. If I say Joel gave the money, you hear it as Joel is the actor. Because the order controls what happens in the sentence. The first word will be the subject, and the word following the verb will be the direct object, and the word following the to or the for will be the indirect object. That's the way English functions. Now, obviously, languages then go complicated and we turn things inside out. And so we can do inversions. You can put something like, you can switch the order and you can make it even to be a question, or you can find ways to signal to the reader that actually this, the one who such and such and such is Joel, in a way that you've inverted the order, but it's still functioning as the subject. It still stands that the basic way of English functioning is what goes first. And that order is going to define things. Okay, but what if you could imagine a language? Let's just imagine a theoretical language. And put out my example again. Joel gave money to a friend. I'll take out the pronoun this time. No, I need the pronoun. We'll do to his friend. Joel gave money to his friend. What if you could imagine a language where instead of the roles, remember my example, my situation, everything's just floating about and I don't know what is what. Well, in order to designate this one as subject and this one as direct object and this is indirect object, instead of that being settled by putting it in a certain order, what if instead I could tag each one of these? So like, just imagine a little tag, when I say Joel, we'll put subject in here. That's what you actually did in grade school. And you wrote verb in here, and you wrote direct object, I don't feel like writing it out, DO, and you write indirect object, and we'll call this possession. Okay, and so you just put those little tags all about attached to the word. Well, that makes for terrible speaking. Joel subject gave verb, direct object, money to his possession, friend, indirect object. Makes for terrible speaking. So let's try to make this better. What if instead we would take, well, I'll tell you what, let's put a little tag and we'll put an S at the end of that. And we'll put a V at the end of this, and we'll put an O for object here, and we'll put a P here, and we'll put an I at the end here. Joel's gave money to his friendy. Theoretically, if you did that, that little tag on there would tell me I'm the subject. This tag, I'm the verb. This is a direct object, possession, indirect object. The little tags would identify what is what. And it would actually be a handy little pathway through the sentence so that you could know which is the subject, which is the verb, and so forth. I'll take it one more. If I did that, then I would, it turns out, no longer be controlled by order, word order. And so at that point, I really could actually put, I could take Joel and I could put it here, and I could say, I'm going to move the verb up there. And, for that matter, let's put the direct object in front, and we can still put this behind. And you know what? Everything could still work out. It could all still work out because, in this case, all of my words are tagged. Money-o, oh, that's the direct object. Gave, oh, that's the verb. Joel, oh, subject, I see. To his, must be possession. Friendy, indirect object. You could read the sentence and know what was what, even though they were in any kind of order. Anywhere you want to put the word, for emphasis, however you want to shift it around. This, in fact, is essentially the system that Greek uses. The Greek system is a case system, and it is to say that every grammatical function is tagged with a little letter, a set of letters. It's formed in a specific way, it's changed a bit, so that you can identify what it's functioning or doing in the sentence. Okay, now I'll talk for a second here just about how nouns and that kind of thing work. We're not terribly accustomed in English to the idea that a noun would change forms based on its role. We're like, oh, okay, a noun is a noun. It's a dog or it's not. Until you ponder a bit and you realize that we do make some translation. We do make some adjustment to nouns. We do decline nouns a bit in order to make a grammatical point. So how about this? If I talk about a dog, and then I just change the word and I put on an S, you've just moved from one to multiples. Okay, what's going on here is that I've added an ending that actually changes meaning. Singular, plural is distinguished this way. You recognize that English is not just, the S system is the primary way, but it's not just that. I do have a handful of words that will do this, and the word itself has changed on the inside. U went to E. Okay, so this is the singular, this is the plural. Plural, there's more than one of them. Singular, there's just one. And I've actually changed the noun in order to change the meaning. That's familiar enough, you can work with that. What's less familiar to us is something like this, where I'm not just changing the singular versus the plural, but I'm actually changing the grammatical function. What is the subject? What is the direct object? What is the indirect object? And I'm changing the word spelling or the word form. I'm declining the noun. I'm changing the form for the purpose of indicating grammar. New concept. That's entirely different. That said, you actually do a little bit of this in English. And the reason is, if I say something like, who gave the money to whom? Who and whom are actually the same type of word. They're both relative pronouns. So what's the difference between who and whom? Who is the way we say it when we have it as the subject. I can't say whom gave money. I can't say it. It won't work. Who is the proper way to make a subject? This is an indirect object, or any kind of object in English is going to be a whom. And that's because it's, we might call it an objective case. You may have learned that. We actually then do have the rudimentary form, it's the leftovers of an old system, an old case system like Greek has. And if I just make this even stronger, I can't say, me went to the store. Nor can I say, he gave it to I. It's I went to the store, or I gave the money to him, or he gave the money to me. It's got to be a me if it's the object. It's got to be an I if it's the subject. I gave the money. I'll do it to myself. I gave the money to me. I and me are the same word. But in one case, it's functioning as the subject. In the other case, it's functioning as the object. So English actually has a very basic form left over of this. This is the essence of what's going on underneath the surface with the Greek system. Okay, now I want to show you what that looks like in actual forms that you can see. And so what we're going to learn here are the feminine forms. I'll just show you the feminine chart. I'll talk about gender later. For now, let's just learn these forms. And what you're looking at here is the form agape. It's a familiar word. It's the word for love. And if you want to think of the stem for this word as agape, just those first four letters, what's going to happen is we'll attach the endings a, ace, a, ain, I, own, ice, os. We'll attach those endings to the root form. The root form for this that you're going to use all the way through is agape. And then you stick on the endings. And what do those endings mean? Well, this is the key for what I've just set up with the grammar. Here's your chart. This is the nominative form. And another way of saying that is this form will be functioning as the subject. In a given sentence, these will be the subject of the sentence. This is going to be the singular column. This will be the plural column. And what that means then is if I want love to be the subject, love conquers all. Love is subject, verb conquers all, direct object. I'll need to use this form. I'm not saying loves conquer anything. I'm saying love singular. Love conquers all, singular. And it's the subject of the sentence, then I'll make it agape, subject. If I want to say that God gave his love, or God extended his love, that would be functioning as the direct object. And that would be the accusative case. So this is the direct object. And I would use this form. God expressed his love. Or we'll say God expressed love. God subject, expressed verb, love direct object. I use this form, agapein. And the way that I know it's the direct object is because I see this ending. The ending is key. If I wanted to do a indirect object, so it's a little harder to do with love, but we'll put in something personal for now. And so we'll say something like, God extended his grace to me. To me is the indirect object. And so this is going to be, an indirect object is going to be translated as to or for. To or for, indirect object. That's kind of your key for remembering what it looks like. This is going to be called the dative case. I should have written these out as well. Accusative, nominative. The dative case is going to be the indirect object to or for. And so if I do something like, I gave money to my friend, I, subject, nominative, gave money, accusative, direct object, to my friend, dative, indirect object. Okay, in my example sentence I just gave there, I gave money to my friend, there was one other word, and that was to my friend. And so this is called the genitive. And the genitive is going to be possession. So this would come out as my, your, ours, any of those forms. But for now, what you just want to do is just translate this with of, and you'll be okay. Okay, so as you're proceeding through a sentence, if you want to say something like the love of God, or we'll say something like the gift, that's subject. No, let's do God gave the gift. There I've got a subject, God. Okay, so that's going to be nominative. Excuse me while I get my tools going. God, that'll be subject, and so therefore we're going to make this a nominative case. Gave, that's the verb. We don't use a case for that. Okay, the gift. Right, remember my advice earlier, I find my verb, God gave, who gave, God gave what? That's your key, God gave what? And the answer to that will be the direct object. So God gave the gift. Well, this would be, remember my chart down here, this would be accusative case. And so God gave the gift, accusative. And then what I'll do is I'll say something like of love. Gift of love. This is possession. And that would have to be a genitive case. Genitive case expressed down here was the second column. And so I would use, if I wanted to do the possession, I would use this form. Okay, now as you practice, you'll see this actually working itself out in real life. Let's just take an example though. I'll go up to my sentence up above, and this would be good for you to take the opportunity to kind of analyze out, okay? So Joel gave the money to his friend. Let's analyze Joel, we already identified as subject. What case would it use? And if you remember from the chart before, what you just do, you go down here, you look at, there's the chart, there's nominative, subject. Subject, nominative, that's the one I want. So since this is the subject, if I was writing this in Greek, I would write this one in nominative case. Okay, I'll just do everything with agape since that's the word that we're doing here. And so we would put here agape because if you remember, the form down here was just simple agape. There's my first form. Okay, so the nominative is going to be written out as this agape. That's the first form. And so in this sentence, the subject form would be, as I said here, write it out agape. Okay, let's go. God gave, or excuse me, Joel gave. So we're going to do gave. There's my verb. I don't need to worry about how to work that right now. My next thing is a direct object. How would I write, if I'm going to write agape as my direct object, how would I do that? If agape was a direct object in a sentence. Well, let's go down here. And I look for direct object. I found it. Here, I'm going to make that accusative. That's what it's called. So we're going to use one of these forms, and it really wouldn't matter, but we can do this one, agapein. Okay, and so if I was using the word love in a sentence as a direct object, how would that be done? If I come back up here, that direct object form would be agapein. Now, this isn't making any sense. I'm agape, agapein, love, love. The subject in the sentence is love. Direct object is also love. I'm just trying to illustrate for you how I would make this a subject, how I would make this a direct object, if love were going to be the direct object. If it was going to be an indirect object, I would just come down here and I would find indirect object here, 2 or 4. Okay, dative's what I want. And so that's going to be agape. I should have commented on this with the alphabet. There are a handful of places where a iota will be written below. So this is a little subscript. And it's just because as the language formed, that iota was there, but it wasn't being pronounced, so we're sticking it underneath. Okay, and that form then, if I was going to be putting this into a sentence and I was forming a direct object, then I would use that form, agape, and it would be with a little iota subscript. The only other thing I have in the sentence is a possessive right here, his. And so if I wanted to say loves something, loves power or loves impact or something like that, similarly, I would be coming down here. I would be looking at the genitive, which is agapes. I would be using that form, agapes. And so in a sentence, if I was forming a sentence like this, which is just obviously an extremely ridiculous sentence, I've lost my example. Here we go. That would also be this form, agapes. Okay, so within a sentence, I might have different forms of a noun. Every noun will have to have one of these forms, and it would have to be a nominative if it's the subject, or an accusative if it's the direct object, or a dative if it's the indirect object, or a genitive if it's a possessive. It's going to be one of these forms. And you just get used to, over time, seeing each one of the Greek words in one of those forms, whether singular or plural. That's your chart. Okay, let me give you this in a couple of other expressions. So here's the simplified endings. And for now, you can just ignore this part of the chart. But what I'd like you absolutely, this is a core thing you must memorize for this course. You need to memorize these endings. A, ace, ain, I, own, ice, os. Notice there is no difference of pronunciation for this A. The eta with a iota subscript, it's the same sound. But you absolutely must memorize these forms. A, ace, ain, I, own, ice, os. You have to know those forms. And here's my advice for learning forms. When you're memorizing endings, just say them over and over. Okay, so when I was a young Greek student, I would walk down a sidewalk saying, ace, ain, I, own, ice, os. I would leave my dorm and I would walk across to the dining hall, and it would take me about 10 minutes. It was kind of a larger space to get there. And so the whole way, I would just walk down the sidewalk. It didn't help me too much with getting to know girls, but it helped me learn my endings. And I eventually married, and it worked out. Just walking the whole way. Ace, ain, I, own, ice, os. Ace, ain, I, own, ice, os. Ace, ain, I, own, ice, os. Say it 1,000 times, and you'll have it. The next time you're commuting, drive along and just say this over and over the entire time you commute. Okay? And I would suspect if you do that for a day or 2 days, you'll know your endings and you'll never forget them. This is how you know your phone number. This is how you know all kinds of things, by just repetition. Ace, ain, ion, isos. I told you to forget about the other side of it. Let me tell you about it now. There are forms where on the singular side, this is a singular column, on the singular side, the eta is replaced by an alpha. And so you'll see sometimes instead of an eta ending, where we saw agape, certain words, it's not agape, a fixed word, a certain word will only use the eta endings, but certain words will use an alpha ending instead. So hemera. Hemera is actually this form right here. Okay, the key with it is that if the word ends in an epsilon, a iota, or a rho, then it's going to use the alpha ending. So agape ends in a p or a pi. And that's why it uses the normal eta endings. It uses this set because it just ends in a normal letter. But certain words like hemera, rough breathing mark, this word ends in a rho. Okay, and the three letters we're talking about, if it's a rho or an epsilon or a iota, if it's one of those, then it's going to use an alpha instead. Okay, I learned this by thinking ear as in ear, and you can say ear, hearing, and so you could say eh. I didn't hear what you said. Eh? I mighty? If that works for you, great. Those three letters, ear, some people have rearranged it and badly thought of the rho as like a P sound because it sort of looks like it. And earlier in your Greek career, it works to do that. And so they'll think of it like pi. Some people have done it that way. But you just look and you recognize if the word ends in one of these three letters, use instead this chart. That chart will be your endings. But grammatically, it's the same. There's no other complexity or anything like that. It's just a matter of writing. Actually, what's going on is that it's easier to say with a alpha sound if you're coming off one of these three letters. And so languages do what languages do, and we ended up with it. A certain word will always and only use one of those two. Agape will always and only use this. Hemera will always and only ever use this. And as long as actually you're familiar with this ending, this is why I say just memorize a, ace, a, n, I, un, isos. As long as you're familiar with that system, then you can mentally learn to switch out the etas for alphas. That's all you're doing. You're just switching alphas instead of etas all the way down. Okay, one last point I'll make for this lesson, and that is for you to know your feminine articles. Look at this chart. You need to memorize this chart as well. That's the bad news. The good news is you basically already have if you memorize the chart above. Because if I do a, ace, a, ain, I, own, ice, os, you'll recognize those endings. So what did I do to derive this chart? I just put a tau on the front of it. Put a tau, a T, on the front of the endings, and I've roughly got the chart. The only exceptions would be the nominatives, singular and plural, and in each one of these, instead of the tau, I've put a rough breathing mark. And so my articles end up being hey, taste, tain, hi, tone, tais, tos. And that's important because an article is just the word the. And so if I want to say instead of love, I want to say the love, I'm going to need these articles. Okay, and an important phrase for you to learn, remember, and I'll nag you about it endlessly, is the phrase or the comment, the article is your friend, the article never lies. If I was doing this with you in person, I would insist that everyone stops and chants it with me, so you might as well chant it with me now. The article is my friend, the article never lies. And all together now again for the people in the back. The article is my friend, the article never lies. We should do it again. The article is my friend, the article never lies. The reason is sometimes these forms are going to get confusing. If you know that basic chart I told you, ace, an, isos, and if you can learn to derive the article, hey, taste, tain, hi, tone, tais, tos, Then when you see a confusing article, or excuse me, a confusing noun sitting out there, if it has an article, look at the article. And the articles save your neck a lot of times. Okay, that'll be it for now for setting up the foundation of thinking about Greek nouns. Where we'll go as we continue on would be to think a little bit more in future lessons, analyzing singulars, plurals, and then we'll learn about a concept of gender. And these are the feminine nouns we've learned today. But if we continued working with the other nouns, eventually we're going to get into the masculine and the neuter nouns. And those are going to have different systems. You'll learn a different system for each one of these, and you'll see how some of these work. But your key point for now is to recognize that chart, memorize that chart, and then make sure that you've kind of gotten the concept of how languages indicate their structure. What is subject, what is verb, what is or direct object, indirect object, possession. To get that key concept and to recognize that Greek works differently, indicating each one of its nouns with these distinct endings. And if you follow through that pathway, you're set up for figuring out the Greek noun system and being on track eventually for putting together simple sentences.